Hi there, I'm Dr. Tom Ulrich, and I like to talk about leadership and engineering. Hey, in this video, I'd like to talk about conducting interviews, and in particular, because I like to talk about leadership and engineering, I want to talk about interviewing engineers. And so what we'll do is we'll talk about some things that are in the literature, some things that are based on solid empirical evidence, and I'll also give you a little bit of personal experience. So the first thing I would say about when you're interviewing an engineer, and really most of this video has to do with anyone, not just engineers, but I like to talk about leadership and engineering. So I'm going to talk about engineers. But anyway, there's a lot of basic ideas that I think have been completely lost, and I think some of it is, we humans have a tendency when we face complex problems, we want to reduce it to simple rules. And, that makes us feel like we've solved something or feel like we understand something when we really don't. And so some of these things I'm saying are kind of working against that idea, where interviewing basically is difficult. It'll never be easy. I mean, the minute you think you really know how to do it, that's probably when you're really got a problem. At any rate, so the first thing I would say is, come at it remembering that an interview is the start of a relationship. If everything goes well, the person's a capable person, and you're going to be working with them for a decade, and you kind of want to start with that mind frame of, you're meeting someone new, and you're kind of using the rules of people stuff as opposed to some other mind frame. And I would say a couple things toward that end is, one is really try to make it a conversation, and if you struggle with that idea, think about, maybe when you're a kid, you're playing catch, let's say, so you've got your best friend there, and you've got your baseball mitt, and they've got their baseball mitt, and you're throwing the ball back and forth. And the way that works is, you throw it to them, they throw it to you. And that's how a conversation ought to be. So if there's two people, and you're having a conversation, it really ought to be, roughly speaking, each one of you speaking 50% of the time. And so if it's an interview and you do all the talking, yeah, that's not good. If it's an interview and they do all the talking, that's not really good either. It ought to be a conversation. Now, toward that end, toward the idea of making, starting this relationship, I would work very hard on trying to make the person comfortable. I mean, interviewing is kind of nerve-wracking, and you're not at your best because you're all stressed out and stuff. And and one thing I know from the research I did as part of my dissertation is, stress impedes the way you think. You're not at your best when you're stressed, and so let's get to know this person. Let's make them stressed. That is a terrible idea. So for instance, absolute mistake, I think, and it's very prevalent, but I think it's a terrible idea, is just the configuration of the room. You're on one side of the desk and they sit down on the other side of the desk. Well, that's what cops do on cop shows when they want to intimidate somebody in the interrogation box. This isn't an interrogation. Okay, don't sit opposite. If it's the sort of thing where there is a table, I think interviews are better off in rooms that don't have tables. But if you got to have a table, as a minimum, kind of scoot over so you're sort of at one of the sides next to the side they're at. If it's a small table, I do not sit on the same side so you're all shoulder to shoulder. I mean, that would also make it awkward. But so I wouldn't go all the way to their side, but just sort of sit on the side or do something to avoid or minimize the we they sort of none shall pass sort of mind frame. If possible, I would take them on a walk. The best way I like to do that is I do one of two things. I'll say, hey, let me kind of show you around, and we're walking, and I'll be sprinkling in comments about what this building is or that. But what I'm really trying to do is get them out of the intimidating interrogation box. And there's a great coffee place down the street from Tandem, and so I'll also, hey, do you like coffee? And let's go for a walk. I haven't had a chance, and make it very natural, like, oh, I'm sorry, I haven't had a chance to get coffee. Do you mind if we walk? And I'm not really trying to get coffee. Oh, okay, that's totally a lie. I'm absolutely trying to get coffee. But you see what I'm saying is I kind of make them feel a little bit like, when you're trying to make somebody comfortable, like the worst thing to do is say something like, I'm really trying to make you comfortable. I mean, just make them comfortable. Don't say it. They'll know it if you succeed. And another comment I would make is, remember, we've talked about this in other videos, but, one of the things, toxic leaders, and just refreshing here, you do not want to be a toxic leader. Toxic leaders are bad. But one of the things toxic leaders do, one of the tools in their toolkits, is they're always looking for ways or excuses to suspend the rules of civility. A toxic leader is just looking for a chance where now they can be a jerk. And, they can do it any number of ways. And basically they want to be a bully. And this is a chance where they can now boss you around with, well, but they're the boss or something. Now, why am I so emphasizing this relationship thing? One is because, well, it's the start of the work is a relationship, and this is the start of that. But remember, from group dynamics theory, something we know is that anytime a person comes into a new group, particularly a smaller group, whether they sort of are aware of it or not, the sort of subconscious question, or the real question that they're wanting to know, is that they're kind of wondering, do I belong here? And what you want to do is kind of bias everything toward making them feel comfortable, which helps them feel like, I do belong here. Okay. Another thing I would say about interviews is, I would say, just constantly remind yourself, interviews are two-way. You're interviewing them, but they're also interviewing you. You want to spend some time, make sure somehow in the process you're telling them about the company, you're trying to help them become interested in the company. What we did, when I was running the software team at Tandem, one thing we always did is we always had 4 or 5 people involved in the interview, and I would always go first. And what I always tell the team is, okay, it's up to you guys to figure out, to sort of assess them. All I'm doing is I'm trying to make them love Tandem, to tell them stories and ask them questions. And, my role was always doing the part that's forgotten, which is, it's a two-way street. I would say related to that too, a mistake people make is they try to be overprotective of the company. They sort of act like the worst thing in the world that could ever happen is you hire the wrong person. And the problem with that is you get so concerned with keeping bad people out, or not, bad's probably not even the right word. You get so concerned with keeping people who are poor fits out that you end up driving away a lot of people who really would be good fits, and they kind of leave just going like, those guys are jerks, or I don't want to work with these people, so don't be like the Black Knight, none shall pass, and get this sort of, the only way you're getting to this company is you got to go through me. I mean, just don't do that. A thing I would say too is, the way I like to express it is, don't turn the and into an or. And what I mean by that is there's 2 things we have to do. We have to be gracious. We have to establish this relationship, to be welcoming. We have to just be decent human beings. And we also have to preserve the culture of our company. We have to preserve the integrity. You don't want to dilute the talent pool. I mean, you do want to be very selective, but you also want to be very gracious. And see, the problem is people make that into an or. They say, well, I can either be all gracious and let everybody in the gate, or I can, really hold our standards high and don't worry about the people stuff. See, they're making that an or. And it needs to be an and. You need to do them both. And a related thing on this two-way thing is, I think it's a mistake to assume that these people are 100% committed to change. In one of my other videos, I think I talked through sort of organizational commitment, and the way that, what the research data shows is people go through a progression. First they start to think about changing. Something will happen, and that's usually the, some one event happens, and they start thinking maybe I should get a new job. And then they start thinking, well, maybe then I should interview. And, much further along the process is, I'm making the decision to change. So the fact they're interviewing does not in any way assume or prove that they're committed to changing. I mean, they're just sort of in the, I'm starting to think about it, and it's a mistake to assume they want to go there. And what you want to do is you want to sort of pull them through the process. I mean, assuming that, your assessment of them is positive and you want them, you really want to pull them through it. And I would say, help them through that process, whether or not they end up here, at whatever company you're at, your company, keep that in mind. Another thing I would say about interviewing is, there's probably some real value in recalling that the interview process is deeply flawed. So there's a bit of research where what they did is researchers, after some interviews, they interviewed the people who did the interviewing, and they asked them questions, and they captured their assessment of the candidate. And then what they did, this is one of these longitudinal studies where they did the initial, they did the interviews and then watched this person for like 10 years. And they did this with a whole cohort of candidates, where they watched them for like 10 years and noted their career. And what they wanted to do is they were looking for correlation between what the interview committee thought of the person against objective measures of how well they did in their career. And what they found was zero correlation. Absolutely no correlation whatsoever. The things that the interview committee found versus how these people did in their career, which there was just no relationship at all. Not positive, not negative, just complete shotgun splatter. So the point there is, I wouldn't emphasize interviews. I would weight it much lower than references and relationships. If there's this sort of like, well, we can't hire people we're related to because that's nepotism. Well, if you show them unjustified favors, that's nepotism. Or if they're not competent for the job, well, that could be nepotism. But certainly at Tandem, at the beginning, we've really emphasized people we somehow know. I'm friends with them. I'm relationship with them. My sister-in-law is just whatever. But those kind of things are going to probably be more meaningful than interviews. And any rate, so I would, and I will tell you, one of the best employees I've ever hired, just truly fantastic engineer. I would say in all the years that I've orchestrated interviews, his interview was the worst. And I was teaching at a local community college, and I knew this kid. This kid's brilliant, and he's an engineer. He was 19 years old. He's introverted. He at the time he was awkward. I mean, he's all grown up now, and we've been working together for 19 years, and he's just a wonderful guy. But it was like his first interview, and it was horrible. And you just have to learn to hold these things lightly. The other outside information is probably better. Another comment I would make is this: there's a body of literature called Person Organizational Fit, and what it boils down to is this idea of where you can have a good employee and you can have a good organization, and you put those two together and it doesn't work. And so it's not just that you're looking for good employees; you're looking for good employees that fit what you're doing. And a lot of that comes down to culture, sort of how you think and all these sort of things, So, for instance, if you have somebody who has just zero sense of humor, I mean, there's plenty of companies. I mean, I have a list, I'll send them to me. I'll tell them where they'll fit great. At Tandem, we're goofy. And, if you don't have a sense of humor, you'll hate it there. We won't like you. And it has nothing to do with their engineering ability. They just simply won't fit. They'll be miserable, So you're asking yourself, will they fit? Another comment I would make, and this is one I see all the time, is people assume when they look at somebody's resume that what they've been doing is what they want to continue to do. And a lot of times the reason people interview is they decide, hey, I've been doing this kind of work for 10 years and I'm ready for something different. So, rather than look at their resume and say, hey, I see you do embedded software, and then you're like, okay, well, let's assess them for embedded software. Take a moment and ask them, what is it you want to do? Now, sometimes people will have objective sentences on their resumes, and they may answer it. But I would still ask them, because what happens too is people give so much information. There's always some person who doesn't know anything, at some, career center or something who I don't know, they think they know stuff, and they say stuff in a convincing fashion, and they'll have some reason that they won't say what they're actually looking for on their objective. So just ask them, hey, what are you looking to do? Remember I said we're trying to start a conversation? What a great way to start the conversation. Hey, so what are you looking for? That's a great way to open, and it gets all two-way street and stuff. In terms of the other questions you ask, here's one that's been really entertaining over the years to watch is I would not ask crazy specific questions, for very narrow information. I worked with a guy, he was a mentor of mine at Parker, a guy named Paul, and a good engineer, good electrical engineer, and I owe him a lot. But it's really funny. He had, by about this time that I'm talking about, he had been an electrical engineer for well over 20 years, really capable designer. He was mostly a digital designer, but he had been reading some magazine and he came across sort of an interesting question related to some type of transistor or something. And he found this subtle little thing. And I remember telling me when he found it, and he thought about it for a few weeks, and he finally realized, oh yeah, that's really tricky. When you do transistors, you have to do this. So he had this, this guy with 25 years experience. It took him 2 weeks to figure out the answer. And then he got all excited about it. And then he started using that question as an interview question. And, we're interviewing new graduates or people who, are seniors in college looking for their first job. And he's asking that question. Yeah, dude, you're crazy. Okay, don't do that. And I've seen it over and over again where people will ask a question that they just recently figured out. And all of a sudden, it's very weird. They act as if, if you don't know that, that's really a problem, even though it took them and 20 years experience, and it took them weeks to figure out. They somehow think all of a sudden like every good human being knows the answer. So I would not ask crazy specific questions. I would ask general questions. A favorite of mine when I interviewed electrical engineers is, okay, so you're at a party, and it's kind of a dumb scenario, but somebody asks you, what is voltage? How would you describe voltage? And that is really a great question, I think, because it's very specific. It's very reasonable for a senior in electrical engineering to be able to have kind of a good answer, and tells you a lot about the person. If they really haven't thought in their mind of, sort of analogies, and, they don't have an answer that's, like the way just because I was a heat and fluids guy in master's, the way I think about voltage, it's like pressure in a hose. Pressure is what drives the water through the hose, and voltage is what drives the electrons through the wires. And you don't need that answer. There's other ways to answer it, but you're kind of looking for that sort of thing where they can have a basic concept that there's no way they didn't study it, and that they can sort of explain it in simple terms. And the final thing is, we've gone insane with this thing about looking for people with experience, and what I mean by that is, I'll talk to people who, will be screening for an intern position. They're like, well, they don't have any experience. Yeah, they're in school still. See, we don't look for experience when we're interviewing for interns. See, kind of the deal is we're going to give them the experience. We don't need them to have the experience. We're looking for potential. We're looking for education. We're not looking for experience when we interview interns. We're not looking for experience when we, interview new graduates. Now, the one exception to that would be, if you're interviewing somebody with a master's degree, you're going to look for a little more. And certainly some of the PhD, even if they're 24 years old and just starting out. I mean, you're going to look for a little bit more. But the mistake is, the 21-year-old senior in college, and you're viewing lack of experience as a downside. That's insane. Anyway, so recapping, interviews are the start of a relationship, and I would take it there, and always remember, interviewing is a two-way street. You want them to fall in love with you. Anyway, so I'm Dr. Tom Ulrich. I like to talk about leadership and engineering. And for more videos like this, you can go to tomulrichconsulting.com. If you're on YouTube, you can search for Dr. Tom Ulrich. And if you don't mind, give me a little like or, subscribe. And I'll keep cranking these things out. In the meantime, thanks for watching, and we'll talk to you later.